But yeah, you find the right spot and it's pretty nice, but you have to be a little vigilant.
Very vigilant. But they did a nice job with the hospital, renovating it and everything.
Yeah, the hospitals came out good, and
I did about 6 months of research there back in the day.
nice.
Yeah, it's changed a lot. Last time I was there,
Find the right spot and it's pretty nice, but
all those buildings are different.
Very vigilant. But they did a nice job with the hospital, renovating it and everything.
Yeah, the hospitals came out good. And
I did about 6 months of research there back in.
Simran, I think.
Yeah, I closed it. It was the live stream. Nobody has the link yet. We're just starting to see if it works or not.
Okay, I
I'll
got
let
it.
you know. I'll let you know when everybody's like joining.
Also, good job putting this together, team. It's I've never seen a whole group on time, and it's a very good work.
Thank you. Thank y'all for joining us.
It's all we have a team that's literally just made to educate. It's a panels education team, and then we have a team that's just made to find guest speakers and just to find volunteering opportunities. So it's so awesome how hard they work. I'm just here to like send you guys the official emails, honestly speaking. But this is all their hard work. People like Gabby and Manasa and so many others. You probably heard from Caitlin and Olivia, and they're the ones that are monitoring the YouTube live stream right now. So they're definitely a huge part of this. Okay, so about in a minute or so, everybody will have the link, and then we're going to start asking questions around 6 o'clock sharp. Okay.
Okay.
And this goes through about 7. Is that what we're saying?
It'll be between 45 to 60 minutes. So if you see like
45, okay.
If we've covered most of the questions by 6:45, then we'll end there, and just any time between that grace period. So have there been lots of organizations asking you guys for panels or guest speaking or anything like that over Zoom during the pandemic? No? Is he calling?
Much as usual.
I've done one or two. How did you find me?
How did we? I don't know what this. Some echo. I think it's because it's rounding off some. So go ahead and everybody. One person is talking for a second. Do you guys hear that feedback, or is it just me from my side?
No, I heard it.
Okay.
I heard it too.
Okay. Okay, if you got fixed now. So I think it's just rebound. So as someone's talking, then let's go ahead and mute. That's one good thing that we're here early then. Okay. And we are live. All right. Well, hello, UGA MSF members. It's great to have you. Today, we're having our medical journey panel, which our education panels team has been working so hard for over the months. We have amazing professionals here.
You cut out for just a minute, but
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. And so they'll be the main anchors. They'll be the ones asking questions and talking, but I just wanted you guys to be here. And with that, we'll start with some introductions and then go straight to questions. Go ahead, Manasa.
So I'm going to be introducing Colin Vandermark. He's a fourth-year student at Mercer University studying biology. Colin has recently been accepted into the Mercer University School of Medicine class of 2025 and is looking forward to beginning his career in medicine.
Also joining us is second-year medical student Zachary Adams. Zachary graduated from UGA with a degree in genetics and a master's in public health. He is now a second-year medical student attending Augusta University at the Athens location, and he's working to be a pediatric oncologist.
Dr. Brian Sullivan attended UGA as an undergraduate majoring in biology. He graduated magna cum laude and was part of the honors program at UGA. Dr. Sullivan then attended the Medical College of Georgia for his MD during his time in med school. Dr. Sullivan was a Poggy Research Fellow, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that, at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Dr. Sullivan is now an orthopedic surgery resident at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine.
We also want to welcome Dr. Ravi Grandi. Dr. Grandi attended the University of Cincinnati to obtain a bachelor's in biology and a master's in business administration while graduating magna cum laude. He also received his doctorate of medicine there too. He is training in internal medicine and anesthesiology and has worked at the Cincinnati Children's Medical Center and Johns Hopkins. Dr. Grandi now works as the assistant chief of anesthesiology in a rural South Georgia town.
Mr. Jabari Robinson graduated from Winthrop University with a degree in biology. Mr. Robinson then attended Auburn University for his Master of Education. He was also a graduate assistant at Auburn University prior to coming to UGA, where he's now an academic advisor. As an academic advisor, Mr. Robinson works with pre-med students and guides them through the med school application process.
Lastly, we have Dr. Richard McCann. Dr. Richard attended UGA as an undergraduate majoring in biochemistry. Dr. McCann then went on to get his PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology from UGA as well. Dr. McCann was also an American Heart Association postdoctoral research fellow at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Dr. McCann is now an associate professor of biochemistry as well as associate dean of admissions at Mercer School of Medicine.
Now we're going to start asking the questions, and just to remind everyone, you can ask your questions via Slack or YouTube chat if any comes up during the live. And this question is for Colin Vandermark, but of course this is an open forum, so anyone can answer after. But what was it like to get your acceptance into medical school, and was the entire process worth it?
I can tell you that the moment I got the email, I was actually in class when I got the email, and I had to leave the classroom because I felt like I was gonna like pass out from excitement, because just for 4 years I worked so hard for it. And I left the classroom and I immediately called everyone that I knew and told them, and they were excited. And then that moment passed, and then I started thinking, did that really happen? I started doubting, like maybe I misread that, maybe that wasn't what it actually said. So I checked it like at least 50, 60 times, reread the whole thing, said, no, you got in. So, and it was the best feeling ever, because the entire time, the entire process was so much work, and I put so much time and sacrificed a lot of activities for my studies, and to know it paid off was the greatest feeling ever. So just for that moment, that one moment of just sheer joy, I'd say it's absolutely worth it, to know that like everything you did paid off, and it was absolutely worth it.
I'm glad. Does anyone else remember what it was like to get their acceptance into med school?
Yeah, I got an email from MCG, and the Medical College of Georgia doesn't put whether you were accepted or denied like in the subject of the email. So you just get like a notification that you have a new email that came from them, and it just says admissions decision enclosed, and you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And so you have to like get like 2/3 of the way through the email before they actually tell you were accepted. So it was like a little bit nerve-wracking reading that. And then I did the same thing as Colin. I went through and read it a couple times to make sure I was like actually reading it correctly. But yeah, that was really cool. It was definitely like a really exciting moment, and called my parents and my family and had a few friends over. So it was really cool.
That is nerve-wracking for sure, but clearly worked out for you. Zachary, I'm curious, how has medical school been for you? Is the class load what you expected, and how has your second year differed from your first year?
So Medical school's a lot. Like undergrad and grad school at UGA were definitely very intense and required a lot of work, but then getting to med school, it's just even more of a ramp up from there. And so I was expecting it to be really hard at the beginning, but the first like month and a half of med school was just like, wow, like, can I do this? And it took a long time to kind of adjust to the load that they do. But they do a good job also of kind of building up the material that you start with over the first 4 weeks. So you start off with like a fair amount, and then it gets more and more. And by your fourth week, you're like in your full intensity of first year. And so they do a good job of like kind of helping you to ramp up during that time. And then second year has been a lot more of self-study. We still have lectures every week, but we have less lectures this year than we did during our first year. And it's more self-study. They give you resources that you should use outside the classroom. Then we use our own resources as we're studying for the STEP exam that comes up this summer. And then we also still have tests every Friday. So
To add on to Zach's point, I think I compare medical school to drinking out of a fire hose. And I think it's a lot of the information is quite overwhelming, but you'll realize some of the stuff comes back to you in clinical practice. Some of the stuff comes back to you in residency. Um, and there's a lot of information, but the one thing to note is there's like a very good support system for you, whether it's from the administration or from your friends that you make, your learning communities, whatever sort of structures they have to help you absorb all that information. But the one thing I can tell you is you sort of have to be self-motivated and have some discipline to sort of sit down and study. There's a lot of fun things you can do other than study and to sit and study. I think the clinical rotations on third and fourth year, I think there's other panelists who can comment on this a little bit more as well. It's actually really cool. I sort of compare the third and fourth year of medical school to sort of taking a sample of everything at a buffet. You get to role play multiple different clinical specialties, multiple different roles. Again, it's a little bit of an overwhelming experience, but I think I look back and I say to myself, oh, cool, I delivered a baby. I might have done a trauma surgery or two. I maybe saved someone's lives here or there, helped, I feel like I'm part of the team. And so it's definitely a cool experience in that regard.
Thank you both for your answer. Reassuring to hear it firsthand what it's been like for both of you.
I have a question just in general. A member asked, what would you recommend to do now in undergrad to prepare for medical school? As in, when should I start internships, taking the MCAT, and applying?
I can start with that. When it comes to getting involved, you should start that early. Because one of the big things that I see is now we're in a pandemic, experiences are limited, and there's a lot of students who are like, I don't have a resume at all. So starting early is key to being successful in the process. Now, does that mean you need to hit campus the very first day? You automatically need to be shadowing 5 different physicians, doing clinical experience already? No, like you can give that chance to get acclimated to school, kind of get that under your feet, and then kind of add on experiences as you're going along. That's what generally medical schools are looking for. They're looking for consistency and for over time you're getting that experience versus like you rushed it in like a month or two there. So the earlier you can start, the better. And then when it comes to the MCAT, really learning your material in class as you're taking them. And so that way, when you get time to take the MCAT, it's not necessarily having to relearn all of that material. The vast majority of people will be taking the MCAT in the spring or kind of more the late spring, early summer of their junior year. But that also kind of varies depending on when you're done with the coursework.
Thank you. Ooh, sorry.
Can I just jump on and add to Jabari's point?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think Jabari brought up a great point. I think the first thing to do is he made one really good point, which is to commit to a passion for medicine, passion for discovery, a passion for healthcare. I think the other thing is I think medical school has gotten a lot more competitive than when I went to medical school. It's not been that long. I'm serious. They were saying this year applications are up about 18% is what I was reading about on Twitter. Not sure if that's the best source, but it sometimes gets the news across. I think it's important to do something unique, or at least that highlights your passion, and that shows that you're successful as a leader. Part of the job as a doctor or anything else you choose to be is to be a leader. You're going to be supervising, at least whether it's nurses, whether it's a nurse practitioner, whether it's a CRNA, you're going to be leading a team of people taking care of a patient, especially when I sit down and think about the time of COVID. So it's important to develop some of that kind of leadership skill, whether it's leading an organization or leading at work or something along those lines. It's to make that decision. The other part is, I can't comment on the MCAT today, but what I did do was take the MCAT twice. And so what I would say is save a little time in case your first number is not good enough that you need to take it a second time. And it says nothing bad about you. I think a number of medical schools still take the higher of the two, but I might be wrong at this point. But I would say to take it a second time if you need to take it. And also to make sure that you really do want to be a doctor. Being a doctor is a career of sacrifice. And there's really a lot of cool professions within healthcare that, looking back, I didn't necessarily pay attention to as much as I should have, but are really valuable, whether it's a nurse practitioner, a PA, dietitians, physical therapy, CRNA, etc. I think they're really cool professions and they don't have quite as much of the educational length that a doctor would have.
Thank you for that.
I would just add, if I could, don't take the MCAT until you're ready to take it. It makes no sense. I've heard people have told me, well, my advisor said, just take it to see how you do. That's not particularly a good idea. Take it when you're ready, as ready as you can be. And as far as committing yourself and filling out your resume, I think that most admissions committees and deans of admission would rather see you do 1, 2, or 3 things really well, consistently and deeply, than a list of 12 things that are just on your resume. And it really doesn't matter what, as long as you show commitment.
Going off of that, Dr. McCann, one of our members would love to know that as Dean of Admissions for a medical school, do you look more for people who are more consistent or something that makes them very unique?
Every applicant to medical school is unique. I've been asked, well, what are you looking for? Well, we're looking for good applicants, but there is no stereotype answer to that. At Mercer, one thing keep in mind for the audience, we take only Georgia residents. We're a private university, but we only take applicants from Georgia. But what we're looking for at Mercer is people who are committed to primary health care. We have shown that. They're either from a rural or an underserved area, or they have done work, volunteer work, paid work, something to show that they are committed to becoming a primary care physician. If your goal is to be a pediatric neurosurgeon, we're probably not for you. If your goal is to be an internist, sure. Or any of the other primary care disciplines. But I can't answer, what are we looking for? We're looking for a good applicant, and every applicant's unique. But what is clear is that, as was said earlier, consistency is important. And if not consistently, improvement. Some people have a hard time adjusting. Maybe their first year is not great, but if they show improvement through years 2, 3, and 4, nobody pays any attention to that first year.
I have a follow-up to your question, or one of the phrases that you said, that you only take Georgia residents. I was wondering what that meant for any international students that may have lived in Georgia for a long time. Does that work with them, or do they have to have a green card or some sort of, if that question makes sense?
That question makes perfect sense. We can, on the AMCAS website, when you're applying to medical school, you can only click on Mercer if you are a legal resident of Georgia. If you're an international student who's a legal resident of Georgia, you're eligible to apply. You do have to be a permanent resident And those are those are the requirements. You also have to have been a legal resident of Georgia for at least 1 year before matriculation. But while that is a minimum requirement, it's not likely to, except in special circumstances, show your commitment to the state of Georgia that we're looking for. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. Thank you. Also, I've noticed, Mr. Jabari, that you've been unmuting. I'm sorry if I had interrupted.
Oh, no, that's totally fine. I wanted to add to what Dr. McCann said about kind of the unique applicant. What I've seen that a lot of students get hung up on that. How do I be unique? And at this point in 2021, you're probably not going to make something new at this point. So don't think of that way. I really challenge students to think about what they're interested in and go do that. And you can, if you're like working with kids, go work with kids and build that leadership that way and build that experience. If you like working with people with disabilities, go do that. And so building really more of that picture of who you are and what your interests are versus, oh, what is this amazing new thing that I can do that no one else has? Because the chances of finding that are smaller. And it's better to just kind of build yourself up overall than trying to find that one unique thing.
Thank you for that advice. Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Grandi are members, and I would love to know if you could tell us how you chose your specialty and how competitive it was, and just about that aspect of your journey.
Sure, I can start off. So actually I didn't know. I'm in orthopedic surgery now, a resident in Baltimore here. I did not know what I was going into. I don't have any family in medicine, and I came into medical school with sort of a clean slate. I didn't know if I was hoping to do internal medicine, family doctor, or surgery. And I think that's really your first division on figuring out what your specialty is do you want to do something more procedural, such as surgery, or do you want to do more something like internal medicine where you're not doing as many procedures? So that's a big caveat with that, because you can still go into internal medicine, you can do cardiology and basically be doing full days procedural work. So there's always caveats, but I think that's sort of the first division. I've always been someone I like working with my hands. So it was sort of a natural fit for me to go towards surgery. And when I got to surgery, I just was on a 2-week block within orthopedics. That's how MCG did it in Augusta. You had a 4-week general surgery, 2 weeks, and 2 weeks of subspecialties. And I had a random 2-week block of orthopedics. I loved the personalities and meshed well with the group and sort of ran with it from there. So that's sort of how I got onto my track. It's sort of non-traditional. A lot of people know from day one that, they had brain surgery and they want to go into neurosurgery because of that. I wasn't that sort of typical person, but I think you find your passions, like everyone is saying, and that sort of, it's amazing how that leads you to ultimately what is a good fit for you. I think there are specialties that are more competitive than others. That changes each year. Just traditionally, dermatology, plastics, ortho, cardiology, all these are competitive, but I think it's you just make your best application, you do your best with studying, and that sort of prepares you in case you want to do any of those specialties.
I think that's a really good question, how you decide what kind of doctor you want to be. I think Brian hit the nail on the head, whether you want to do more procedural, you want to do more of the thinking, the outpatient kind of work, what kind of lifestyle you want at the end of the day. Do you want to work? Do you want to be on call? I think at the end of the day, call is an adventure. It's great, but it's also something to think about. I think the other piece to think about is who you get along with. So I did pick anesthesiology because I think I really like the anesthesiologist. I think the operating room is really a special place to be. I was very interested in the relationship between like the physiology, the pathology, and all that stuff. I really walked into medical school not knowing what I wanted to do. I didn't even know at the beginning of an undergrad that I wanted to be a doctor. So you sort of meet great people along the line that will push you in a direction. And sometimes that's what it takes to make the difference.
Thank you so much, you guys, for your answers. And some of the members want to know that does it matter what your major is to getting into med school? Would not having a science major hinder any chances of getting in?
I've been a member of our admissions committee or an associate dean for the last 10 years, and the short answer is no. Slightly longer answer is you have to be prepared to do the work. And you know that requires that you know biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, and physics. But we are just as happy to see a history major or an English major who's serious, an anthropology major, psychology, who's serious about becoming a physician, as someone who has spent his or her entire college career taking microbiology and genetics and immunology. So there are more direct routes. I thought about going to medical school when I was a freshman at the University of Georgia. And my advisor said, well, the shortest route to getting the requirements is to major in chemistry. And that is true. But that is not the best, the only, or even the preferred way.
And I'm assuming that it works the other way around, as in med schools don't necessarily care if you're humanities and that makes you look better than a science major. Am I correct?
I don't think it makes any difference.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to that? Yeah, I think it was a pretty good explanation by itself.
As someone who's not a core science major, I appreciate hearing that. Our next question is for Dr. Grandi. Our members want to know, why did you pursue a master's in business administration and how has that helped you in your career?
So I think that's another really good question. So I went to business school, I got an MBA before I went to medical school. I also went on to work in venture capital I took a year off after the second year of medical school and worked on looking at how healthcare innovations can can push the envelope a little bit in healthcare, and learning a little bit about how we take some of the research that our PhDs do and try to bring them to market. I think it can help you. I think healthcare at the end of the day, I hate to say this to everyone here, is a business. I mean, and if I can tell you one thing, all the hospitals today are struggling. If you watch the news, they always talk about how can we do elective surgery. So I actually did my residency in New York City. And so I remember the day that COVID hit New York City in March, like it was yesterday. I was on call, it was March 15th. Cuomo hadn't shut down the city yet. And they were talking about turning off elective surgery. And you hear all these people walk down the hall talking about how much money the hospital is going to lose just from cutting off elective surgery. And so I think the challenge of, if you do get a business degree or an MBA, you can sort of steer your career into one of those careers where you can do a little bit of management. So spend about 20% of my time right now trying to figure out how we can run the operating rooms more efficiently, how we can do some sort of bulk purchasing. So how can we convince some of the surgeons to use similar equipment, between them so we can buy in bulk instead of buying all these individual pieces of equipment. We also figure out how we can keep people in the hospital short. I spend a lot of time looking at length of stay, so we can turn over our beds a little faster. And so that's sort of some of the things you can look at if you do go on to get a business degree. There's a lot of options to get another degree. You can go ahead and get your public health degree. You can get a degree in education. You can go ahead and get your PhD or a law degree. At one point, I thought it was really cool to get a law degree and be an MD, JD. But then I looked at how long it was, and that was going to be another 3 years. And I was like, oh my God, I'm already adding up the time. So every year you add, it's just you keep on adding and getting all these cool things. So it's just something to think about, but it can really provide you with an advantage to sort of steer your career in a direction of your one of your side interests.
That is really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
We have another question along the same lines, as in, does having a graduate degree help your chances, or does that also not really matter? Like having a master's degree?
Well, that's something that in the Office of Admissions we deal with all the time. Well, it depends. It depends on what the degree is in and why you have it. We look at an applicant's entire educational history. We get quite a few applicants who, well, as an undergraduate, maybe I could have done better. I mean, it's not uncommon. People who get a master's degree that's a legitimate master's degree that's rigorous and in, say, biomedical sciences, that looks good. Because of the nature of what kind of medical school we are, we do not get too many people with PhDs applying to medical school here. I know at Johns Hopkins that's more common. But a master's degree, if it's something that you want to do, if you want to spend 2 years and get a master's and do some research, it certainly can help. One thing that I would emphasize to you is that while you feel like time is passing, we don't really look at the age of an applicant ever, and to a first approximation. And starting medical school 2 years after you're 22 years old is no different from starting when you're 22. And if it takes that long to get the Master of Science in Biomedical Sciences or an MPH or an MBA, that's fine. That's great. What we want to look for is someone who is doing what he or she wants to do and has a purpose.
Thank you for the answer.
Our next question is for Colin. We would love to know, what was the application process like with COVID going on?
In a lot of ways, it didn't change too dramatically. All the steps were the same. Really, the biggest difference was the MCAT, because the MCAT got shortened. Normally it's like 7 hours and 15 minutes or something like that. My test was a little over 5 hours. So, and my MCAT got canceled originally. So that made it harder to study for because I had prepared for it as if it was going to be in May. Then it got pushed back to August. So that disrupted my schedule a little bit. So trying to balance volunteering and the application process and studying for the MCAT, it was a lot, but it was definitely doable. But overall, because I looked at forums online about how the process works, because I was curious, and just the overall process, all the steps were the same. If anything, the deadlines for certain things actually got pushed back. So in a way, some things got easier. Because like the MCAT, you didn't have to have your MCAT in by a certain date because a lot of people have their MCATs canceled. So they got their scores later. So the MCAT deadline got pushed back. So that was a help. But yeah, overall, it was tough, but it was definitely doable. It wasn't as bad as I imagined it would be as a freshman. I heard all these horror stories and I thought, oh, I have no clue how to do this. I have no clue where to start. But once I got into it, I realized, yeah, I know what I'm doing, kind of, and I can, it worked out. So.
And just to follow up, how were med school interviews and how did you prepare for those? And how did you study for the MCAT? A lot of questions coming in from people who are also preparing to apply during the pandemic.
Yeah, so as for the interview, I can't answer that because I actually did not interview. I was part of a program Mercer has called the Special Considerations Program. And it's a program I applied to in high school and interviewed for as a senior in high school and got accepted into. And basically, the program's idea is if you have a certain GPA at the end of your junior year and you have a certain MCAT score and extracurriculars and letters of recommendation, then your interview is waived. So I did everything in the process except for interview. So interview questions, I have friends who interviewed and I know this year they're all on Zoom, but as for the details, I'm not sure of those. But the MCAT, you asked how I studied for the MCAT, right? So originally I thought I would be taking the MCAT in May. So I made this beautiful MCAT study schedule back in January and I followed it religiously until around March when COVID happened. And then everything went online and my MCAT got canceled. So that took my nice, beautiful schedule and my schedule went out the window like overnight. So I went from super organized to super disorganized very fast. I think a lot of applicants this year can tell the same story. And so I chose, because all my classes were online and that was such a huge adjustment, I chose to just focus on my classes, my college classes, get good grades in those because I had a hard time learning over the computer. So I would rather do really good in my classes and wait to study for the MCAT than do half of both and do mediocre on both, if that makes sense. Because you could always retake the MCAT if you need to, but the grades you get in your classes are with you for life. So I chose to study for my classes and focus on those. And then after those ended, I just did flashcards because that's how I learned the best. I just did open-ended flashcards. Like I would write just very open-ended questions, and if I could answer them, great. If I didn't answer them, I would study that topic more. And I think in total, I did several thousand flashcards over the course of 2 months. Just 8 hours a day, flashcards over and over. I had them on my phone. That's because the phones are so awesome because they're with you everywhere. So you can have your flashcards no matter where you are. So no matter where you are, you can review. If you're on a car ride, you can review and like anywhere, which is awesome. And I just did a lot of practice tests. I probably did about 7 practice tests. And even though my test was shorter, I did the full length 7-hour ones because I figured it's more practice, first of all. And if I can handle those, I should be able to handle a shorter test. And so that was my technique is flashcards, really nail the content, and then just practice tests.
Thank you for the advice. The 8 hours a day thing kind of scared me a little bit, but I'm sure that everyone appreciates.
Anyone can chime into this next question, but we would love to know what is your advice for preserving your mental health through the entire process, the application process, medical school, residency, beyond?
I think the biggest thing for me is like having a schedule that at 11 o'clock every night, I put everything down, and that's like the end of my night because I like to go to bed earlier and wake up earlier. So I usually get up at like 6:30 in the mornings, but 11 o'clock, I'm done with schoolwork for the day. Even if there's more stuff that I want to study or focus on, that's the time that I call it quits. And I'm like, okay, I can get to this tomorrow morning. But it's good to have a sharp cutoff time that you don't keep studying past bedtime and keep like working until 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and then you're losing out on sleep, and sleep's a big component of your mental health. And I think also just like exercising on a regular basis and having that built to my schedule also has really helped me a lot.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this is always the funny question that people tell you an answer, but for example, I agree with you should always exercise. I haven't exercised for probably the past 2 weeks. So, I think it's important. You got to find the things that you enjoy and just stay true to those things and realize that there's going to be good times and bad times. If you're on a busier rotation, if you're studying for step one, if you're whatever you're doing, you may have to step back a little bit, but don't sort of lose sight of the things that you enjoy doing because those keep you grounded. And I agree, sleep is always important, eating a good diet, and prioritizing the relationships with family, friends, whoever sort of brings you happiness, and keeping those in your life.
Yeah, excuse me. One of the things I say to that, one of my former supervisors told me about being the appropriate amount of whelmed. So there's overwhelmed, underwhelmed, and just whelmed in the middle. And the idea is to be at whelmed. And whenever you find there's times that you're getting overwhelmed, look at what you have on your plate, what needs to get done now, what can take a little bit more time to work on, and you can put it to the side and kind of break down what you need to do so you're not overwhelming yourself. And especially kind of like in this time in college, well, not during the pandemic, I'm like, have fun. I think as a pre-med student, you're always like in this thought of like, I have to go, 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 or I won't get into medical school. And it's like, if you get through college and you have nothing to look back on to talk about that experience, did you go to college? So have some fun during that time. Yes, you need to work hard, but you can also enjoy it.
I think they hit on the big ones, coming up with schedule, doing what you love, hanging out with people. I think what worked really well for me is having a night or something that you sort of look forward to, that's away from the books or away from school, that you can try to do despite all your other call obligations or your schoolwork, is really nice to look forward to.
Thank you all for the advice. It's definitely good to know how to manage stress. I think a lot of us have been very stressed out. And I guess back to the technicalities of like the application because of the pandemic. What would be the best way to obtain shadowing hours and clinical experience? Or if anyone can answer, what do you think would be a good idea for pre-med students to be doing where they won't be able to get in-person shadowing hours? Does virtual shadowing hours, like, is that a bad thing? If anyone can speak on those.
This is in admissions, this is something that has been a thing for the past year, basically. One thing I want all the pre-meds aspiring physicians out there to realize is that everyone is in the same boat right now. Research has been shut down. Shadowing has been shut down. So don't think, oh my gosh, I can't do this, so that's going to affect my application. It probably won't, because everybody's affected by the same thing. Find something to do that's important. If you were planning to shadow a physician and you can't, I can't tell you exactly what to do, but there will be something. There will be a place where you can volunteer. There will be a place where you can do community service. There will be a place where you can show how altruistic you are. These are important. Starting in probably February of last year, admissions deans all across the country realized this was going to be different, and policies were changed. We did not, previously we would never evaluate an application until the MCAT was submitted. We of course changed that. Laboratory courses online are okay. Before they were not. Laboratory courses online is more or less a contradiction in terms, but under the circumstances, it's not. So everybody is in the same boat. We're doing this on Zoom. If there were not a pandemic, you might have people in person in one of the auditoriums in Athens. So look hard, find something. And one of the things that we ask applicants is, well, how has COVID-19 affected your preparation for medical school? Tell us. Don't make excuses, but tell us.
Yeah, and to that, whenever anyone ever comes and meets with me, the conversation is keep at it. And I think that's a good thought process for whether we're in a pandemic or not, just generally finding experiences. It is hard to get shadowing experiences, especially in Athens. And so, or especially if you don't know anyone. So those are kind of things that like keep searching, kind of have that tenacity to still look for experiences because people are getting experiences still, but it does take a little bit more effort than normal. But I think a large part of this is doing something, staying active, doing remote volunteering. There's plenty of things out there. I think a lot of things that media was like, things are shut down, it's gone. Now I'm just doing class. And it's like, okay, let's get back. Let's do some of the clubs and organizations. Let's do some of the volunteering. Just that you are staying active and gaining these skills throughout the process.
Can I just add to this? It's been a few years since I ever sat on an admissions committee or even ever had an interview, but I'll tell you the story, my story. I never knew anyone in medicine who's a doctor. I was the first doctor in our family. I started at 18 as a transporter in a hospital. While I was a transporter, I went back and became a nurse's aide. And then eventually I took some random class and you could be allowed to answer phones and file charts. And this is a different era where COVID wasn't around. But through that process, I think you meet some different people, whether they're physicians or others, and you can maybe get your leg in the door. It's a little bit more work. It's actually a lot more work. You make a good amount of money, I will tell you that. And I'm not telling you all to go into the COVID front lines to push beds around or to trade bedpans out. But it's something to keep in mind as an avenue to maybe get your foot in the door to see if you actually like a hospital or not.
And I'll second that. I worked as a CNA in a nursing home for a year in undergrad here in Athens. And so took a course and became a nursing assistant and then worked there for a year and enjoyed getting that clinical experience on that side.
Thank you. I actually have a follow-up question based on something that you said, Dr. Grandi. Another member is also the first of their family, well, in this case, to go to college, and they find the journey particularly difficult because they have to navigate it by themselves and don't have connections. So this question is an open forum, of course, but how much does it matter who you know when it comes to getting into med school? Do connections matter, and to what extent?
I don't know the politically correct answer to that question. I think it helps get your leg in the door if you know someone who's doing research or if you know somebody to shadow. Um, but I think you can also try to navigate around a little bit if you're just sort of in the right spot by God's grace or by accident. I think Dr. McCann or one of the admissions counselors or more important people can help us out with that answer.
I would say when it comes to shadowing, that's the best avenue. Like there's, especially at UGA, because we are not a pre-med program, we're an advising office. So that takes out where some institutions may be able to place you in shadowing and take liability for you to go do that. We can't. And so some students that would have possibly had an avenue through that, we don't have that anymore. Or technically we never had it at UGA. And so that kind of, you need those connections in reality to kind of get some of those experiences and to move forward. I think there's definitely avenues in this process where, speaking specifically to UGA students, there's parts of it you need to kind of push forward and you do have to do the work yourself. But that's also why our office is here. You shouldn't be doing it alone. You should have that support. You should understand what are the steps of this process and things to look forward to. And not I don't know anything from the start. Ideally, that shouldn't be the goal. There are things that you have to do because this is the career that you want. We can't give it to you. You have to work for it. But we can help on that process to an extent. I think the biggest area that we can't fully say, hey, this is where you need to go to get shadowing, is that's probably the biggest area that we aren't able to do.
Just a brief follow-up. I was a first generation college student, and it was tough to know what to do, when to do it. My parents were supportive, but neither had been to college, so they didn't know. Ask for help. Don't be bashful. You want to be a physician. I was a very shy person, I still am, but ask for help, ask for advice from people that you know and trust, and eventually something will probably work out. But again, I have to say that currently, during COVID-19, every admissions committee, every admissions office, every admissions dean understands that things are different. Every admissions office also understands that not everyone has an uncle who's a cardiologist. So we do take these things into consideration.
I would also echo, I think one other side of it, I do think people that have family in medicine have maybe even a better exposure to understanding what the field is like. For example, I went into medicine and had no idea what being on call meant, what the lifestyle was, and some of those things versus I had a best friend growing up with who both of his parents were physicians, and he steered clear from medicine because of that, because he didn't want the constant phone calls and things like that. So I think beyond even just the application process, I think the people who do not have family in medicine, it's sort of the onus is on you to do extra shadowing, to reach out to individuals to hear their perspective so that you know what you're getting into. Because it's a life commitment and something that you want to make sure you know what you're signing up for. So.
Thank you all for sharing that great advice. So as we start to wrap up, I have one last question for you all to answer, and that would be, if you could give everyone listening one piece of advice, what would it be? So whoever can start.
So I'll start. I would tell everybody to enjoy the process. It's so easy to get fixated on the highs of the process, getting accepted to medical school, getting accepted to residency, graduating from residency, getting your first job, getting your first big paycheck. I think that's the part that everybody remembers. But I think the biggest part of it all is to enjoy the process, remember the ups and remember the downs. And I'd leave you with that you're going to meet so many people along the journey who really make that difference to you, and to remember to pay it forward when you get to the end, whatever that might be. And keep your eyes open for all the other opportunities you might see in medicine, whether it's advanced professionals or nursing or whatever it might be.
And just briefly, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I want everybody listening to remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint. You have to work hard, you have to pace yourself, you have to be disciplined. But if you are disciplined, then you can reach your goal. And admissions committees across the country recognize those who are disciplined and willing to work hard to get where they are. So work hard, like Colin would tell you that. Work hard, take care of what needs to be taken care of today, and then it won't be a problem tomorrow. And what I told both of my children, who are now grown, nobody ever has to explain away good grades.
I think one thing that I wish someone had told me is that everybody has struggles along the way, because there was a lot of points when I was going through the process where I felt like I was the only one struggling. I would listen to everyone else and they'd be like, oh, I have 4.0 GPAs and I have thousands of hours of volunteer under my belt. And I would just feel like I was so far behind everyone else, but that couldn't have been further from the truth. You know, everyone has points where they doubt what they're doing. They doubt if they can make it. So I just wish I would have known how common that was, and that I wasn't alone in that regard, and that that's completely normal to feel that way, and that you can overcome it pretty easily. And if you do feel like you're struggling, to definitely reach out for help, because you're definitely not the only one.
I think my biggest thing, and we kind of hit on this earlier, would just be make sure you take time for yourself, and really focus on yourself, because like everybody said, like this is a marathon, and if you don't take time to focus on yourself, you won't be able to make it through. And so it's really important on Saturdays. If UGA has a football game in Athens, I'm going to be at the football game. And then if we're playing away, then I'm going to be watching the game on TV. And like those times are times where I block out. I don't study on Saturdays, or most Saturdays now. And I really make sure I spend that time just focusing on myself and doing what I enjoy, whether it's UGA football or basketball or hanging out with friends, or spending time with my family. It's just make sure you take time for yourself and give yourself at least one day a week where you put everything to the side and just really focus on you, because your mental health needs it, and you won't make it through if you don't have it. And especially right now during undergrad, this is the best time to focus on it, because if you don't have a good foundation in undergrad, it's even harder to get into medical school and then to start applying that and working on that then.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think those are all great points. Especially echo what Dr. Grandi said. With there's always something harder. If you're thinking that I'm taking the MCAT now, and then after the MCAT life is great, it's just not a good attitude. Step one's going to be harder than the MCAT. Step two is you don't have to worry too much about it. But there's always a next step. There's always a next hurdle. So if you're not enjoying the process, then you're going to be running in the rat race forever and not be happy. So I think that was a great point. My sort of last tidbit of advice would be to find whatever you enjoy doing and just do it well. I think a lot of people get caught up in doing something that is going to look good on paper, or is that perfect thing to make them a good applicant. But I always think whatever you enjoy is going to shine when you tell the story in the interview process, and you're going to just always do better work when you're genuinely enjoying something. So whether that's research or volunteer work, just do it well and have fun with it, and then that will shine in itself.
Well, thank you so much for all of you guys coming and taking your time out and your experiences and your wisdom. We really appreciate it. We hope to be in touch with you as well. Now, I see you've already.
You're
Because we
totally
always
fine. You're totally fine.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think just a general piece is for everyone, like, make an appointment with our office, come in and talk to us. Like, you're not alone. I know it feels that way, but you're not alone. There's a lot of pre-med students at UGA. The person that's next to you virtually in class or in person in class is probably a pre-med student. So that is someone you can connect with and go through this process with, as well as our office.
And I'll just add on to that, a lot of medical students at the medical partnership here in Athens, they work with the admission or the pre-med office here, and they do like once a month where they, I guess now it's over a Zoom session, I'm not sure, a lot of my classmates do it, where you can have like a question and answer session with medical students. And so that's something that the pre-med office offers. And so take advantage of that. If you're not on their listserv, you should join the listserv and follow up with that.
All right. Well, that concludes our panel today. Thank you so much. It was amazing hearing all the achievements you've done. We hope to follow in your footsteps and learn from you as we go. We're definitely going to keep in touch with you guys. So members, thank you for joining with the YouTube stream. I'm going to give the panelists a couple of seconds to leave, and then we can share screen and show the QR code for your attendance. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, you can scan that QR code. You cannot screenshot this QR code and send it to us. That won't count because there's a couple of questions to make sure that you were attending the panel in this form itself. If the scanning isn't working, you have that URL right at the bottom. And thank you for attending. Once you have your attendance in, you are free to leave.